Hello and welcome along to another RTÉ Rugby podcast. Neil, Treacy, Bernard, Jackman and Eddie O'Sullivan all with you this week, recapping on the Champions Cup, looking ahead to this weekend's URC and Women's Six Nations as well. And before we get into all of that, Eddie, we were just talking off air this weekend. It's all coming down to the final weekend for yourselves at Buccaneers. City of Armagh this weekend, final game of the regular season of 1B. Win and you get into the playoffs, or win and you could get into the playoffs. Could get through with a defeat, but you don't exactly want to be leaving that one to chance. So it's all coming down to this weekend.
Yeah, well, we're kind of in a position we didn't expect to be in, really, like that. We're in a shot, like we just got promoted. So obviously when you get promoted, your first year up, you're gonna stay where we are. So things went probably ahead of schedule for us, and we had a really good run in the league. But I kind of expected we'd come under the cosh a bit at the end of the season because we've picked up injuries with our own players. We've lost a couple of key players. We've lost Shane Layden, who's an awful loss in our back line. And we lost a very good back row, Keane McCann. And we've had our players like them got injured. Over Connacht, Usher McCormack, and then Connacht have pulled up players. So with us losing players and Connacht pulling up players, we're just a weakened team now. We're into the last block. So our results would reflect that. But we're still in with a shout, so you don't know. We'll give it a rattle against Armagh. They're already promoted, so they're probably coming to celebrate a bit, So hopefully we'll spoil their celebrations on that end. But they're promoted now, so that they're untouchable. We're having a shot here at a playoff place. We'll see how it goes. It'll be tough. But look, we're a lot better. We're a lot better set than I thought we might be at the start of the season, coming up a division. With a good run, and we're never in relegation trouble, so I'm very happy with that.
You didn't send a few celebratory slabs of cans up to the lads in Armagh. Just you take those lads, enjoy them for the week before you come down. No,
no, we didn't. I think they'll want to finish on a high too. They've de facto fought their way out of the league. It's a change because last year I think was all Wesley won all their league matches. And there was a playoff then, and they got caught in the playoff and got beaten. So I think this year was done. They did it right. They said the team that wins the league automatically goes up. It was very tough on Wesley last year, having won the league, to have to go into a playoff and then get caught in the playoff, and not get promoted. So Armagh are gone up by their own right, to be fair. And we had a good humdinger with them up in Armagh at the first game of the season. We lost by 2 points up in Armagh. So I'm looking for another humdinger on the weekend and see what happens.
Yeah, it's a great time of the season, Birch. Like there's just so much on the line right up and down the divisions between promotion and relegation. And as Eddie said, now that there's, you've the one automatic promotion spot plus the playoffs at least, it kind of widens the margin and brings an extra team in contention for both promotion and relegation up across the divisions.
Yeah, no, it's massive, and we obviously we fell short against Lower Valley, but that final is on this weekend. Lower Valley against Richmond, and the winner of that has automatic promotion to the All Ireland League, and the loser has a playoff shot. So it's great to see these competitions. Whether you'd hope you're involved in a club at the top, but if you're a club at the bottom as well, it's that sense of jeopardy and that fight to survive. And looking at all the divisions, there's still so much to play for, which is exactly what I suppose you want in a competition structure.
Yeah, it should be great. So if you're out and about around the country on Saturday afternoon looking for something to do, get out to your local club. Last round of the regular season games and playoffs to come as well for a good few teams. But guys, we'll start into the Champions Cup, and I know both of you were at the Aviva Stadium on Friday evening. Leinster booking their place in the semi-final of the Champions Cup. 55-24 winners against Leicester Tigers. Strange scoreline, didn't really seem like it was heading that way for a lot of the game, but Leinster just, or Leicester, I should say, just completely ran out of gas after the third quarter. But talking about the game itself in a little bit, but the narrative post-match. Last week, Dan McFarlane was talking about Leinster's advantage when it comes to the demographics they're working with and things like that. Richard Wigglesworth this week was talking about the gulf in what teams have available to spend. There's a kind of a culture war narrative developing after each of these matches now. And, from one side, Leinster do have this enormous budget and they're able to spend a lot more than most teams in the Premiership. They're probably on par with the bigger French teams. But as Leo Cullen pointed out as well, they've won one Champions Cup in the last 10 years. So we're not exactly talking about a juggernaut that has to be stopped. Where's the middle ground in all of this?
Oh, no, I think the middle ground is to accept, because of demographics, because of the work that's done at developing those young players, both before they get to Leinster and after they come to Leinster, the work that's done commercially, the fact that it's the only professional sport in a in a place with I suppose a big population. It's a game that the corporates love. Leinster have a lot of advantages. They have a lot of things in their favour, and while they haven't won a European Cup or won one in whatever 10 years, and the last one's 2018, you're looking at this squad and you're seeing the development of the Van der Fleers, the Dorises, the Keenans, the James Lowe, the Gibson Park, who 4 or 5 years ago weren't internationals and now are star players for Ireland. And I think Leinster have the tools to win Europe. You know what I mean? And, you would say that if they do things right, they should be thereabouts every year, because what Wigglesworth is trying to say is that the game has changed in England. Exeter are into a semi-final, but that team is breaking up. That team is breaking up because of salary cap. Some of its best players are leaving, and I don't think they have I don't think they'll be in the final. I think it'll be, La Rochelle in the final. Toulouse obviously have, a very good budget. They're spending the salary cap in France, which is 10.5 million. It's nearly double the UK at the moment, or the Premiership at the moment. So you would expect the Irish and the South African and the French to be at the top of the game. And South Africans have now gone to private money. The Bulls are now backed by private money. The Sharks are now backed by private money, and the Stormers are doing well, but on the field, and they've got a good squad together. But financially, they're in a very unstable position, so they're probably going to need to find private money. But that's the reality of it, and the game has changed. And Leinster maybe lost to teams in the past who had more budget, but I think it's credit to Leinster now that they've been able to find the resources along with the IRFU. So it's a mixture of both to build a squad who look like they're capable of winning it, and that's the reality of it. And they are well coached. There's a great culture there. There's lots of things being done well. So I don't think it's an attack on Leinster. I think Leinster maybe have taken umbrage to it, maybe the wrong way. I think Wigglesworth is just explaining where he's at. And 5.5 million, which Wigglesworth's operating under, can get you a good team. They have Andre Pollard, they have Jasper Wiese, they have Dan Cole on the bench. They have a good team, a good 23. What the extra money gives you is the ability to have, third choice or fourth choice like Scott Penny and Will Connors. That's where the beauty is. So if you get injuries, you can bring players in. If Robbie Henshaw gets injured, Charlie Natai, can play. He's an All Black and a highly inexpensive recruit who does a great job. He's there. He's very like Easton Siva. He's there when the internationals aren't there. But that's what Leinster have, and that's what the extra budget gives you. And with that comes pressure. Accepting that you have the best budget creates pressure, and obviously coaches try and avoid pressure. But I think that's what's playing out at the moment. Eddie, what do you think about it?
I think Wigglesworth is probably he's a bit confused about how the whole thing is working. Like, I think comparing Leinster to the teams in England and in France is a misnomer. Like, Leinster are a product of a very efficient and streamlined Irish rugby system. Irish rugby is very atypical for the Northern Hemisphere because players are centrally contracted. There's 4 professional teams. The RFU manages the whole environment. Leinster are the strength they're at. And we all know the reason for that is, okay, they have better budgets. They're in a capital city of over 1 million people. They have the province is a big province. They've, great support in the province as well. But the school system is delivering incredibly talented players. You know that, Bernard. You've been around it long enough. And even Leinster's reach, and I was going through this exercise if I got time, but I didn't get time, is how many Leinster players are playing across the provinces now professionally. Not just out of Leinster, but how many Leinster players are in Ulster, Connacht and Munster. And then if you do another deep dive on that, how many of those players are coming from which schools in Dublin? And it seems to me that the school powerhouse in Leinster is delivering a conveyor belt of talent, which benefits Leinster primarily, but also benefits the other provinces. Now, Richard Wigglesworth, to be fair, wouldn't understand that whole dynamic. So him jumping on Leinster have loads of money and we don't, is kind of a very shallow argument as to why Leinster are so good and Leicester struggle. If he looked in the other direction, you know, he'd get a better picture as why they're not as good. Because as you know well, if you compare the English and the French system, which are more aligned, you know, they have similar playing populations. You know, they have similar attendances at games. They get their average attendances are like 12 or 14,000. I mean, their population player, they've got 125,000 in France, 130,000 in England. But so after that is where the money kicks in. And salary cap in France is twice that of England. The average salary in England is about £170,000. And it's nearly €250,000 in France. And the big one is, you know, the TV money in England is 110 million, and in France is 340 million, about to jump to nearly 400 million pounds, or over 400 million euros a year. And that's where the difference is. And you know, the GIF regulations in France are a lot looser. They're getting tighter, but that's why the big money can bring in the big players, and they can build depth into their squad. So Richard Wigglesworth's right that they're going to find it very hard with English teams who are struggling financially between one thing and another to compete with the French teams. But to compare French teams to the Irish teams, or particularly Leinster, it's not a fair comparison. It's a completely different product, completely different genesis of how Leinster got to where they are. And again, you know, even the simple numbers, we support 4 professional teams. They support, you know, 12 in the Galar Premiership, 14 in France. So even in England, it's spread among 12 teams, you know. So I just think I could see where he was coming from, but I just think it was the wrong comparison. You know, that argument he made is very valid against Toulouse, but I don't think it stands up against Leinster. We have a very unique rugby ecosystem here. For the last 20 years, we've been the envy of the Northern Hemisphere. And it goes back to the days when the RFU made a strategic decision. They would have 4 professional teams. They would fund them. They would be grown through an academy system, which would be built on the school's rugby system. And it's worked incredibly well. I remember years ago when I was with Ireland, and I was at a dinner with Rob Andrew, who was the head of the RFU at the time in terms of rugby development. And he said to me that he would give his right hand to have what I had in terms of the access to the players and the system we had. I remember Laporte, when he was coach of France, again asking me questions around that, how we accessed our players, how we developed them. And the other thing as well about France is they have a very strong academy system in France. You know that, Bernard. It's government supported. And like, for example, it's funny how names crop up, but for example, like you see players like Maxime Luca, who's the backup scrum half in France. You have Albin Places and Alessandro Ruma, who came off the bench for Toulouse last weekend. They were in the Biarritz Academy when I was there. All those 3 players are in the Biarritz Academy. So the French academies are actually very good as well. And they're government supported, they're well regulated. I don't know if the English rugby academies are as efficient as the French rugby academy. So like France have built their brand based on good academies, strong rugby tradition, and truckloads of money. And I don't think England can match that. But I don't think it's the right thing to compare Leinster with Toulouse. It's a very different ecosystem here.
One to throw to both of you. Feel free, whoever wants to go first on this one. Do you see at any point in the next few years a salary cap coming in at URC level or for Champions Cup / Challenge Cup rugby?
No, because the RFU would be mad to agree to it. Obviously, I think the Scots and the Welsh, and the Italians, maybe South Africans would go for it. But I think our model's sustainable. You know what I mean? And that's what everyone should be fighting to create, is a sustainable model where you can give your teams and individuals the best possible chance of success. And the Irish model is working incredibly well for Leinster at the moment. You know, Munster and Connacht have a couple of big games over the next 2 weeks before we can say, like, if we only had 2 teams in the Champions Cup next, I know it's unlikely, but then you'd have to say, well, it's not great for Connacht and Munster at the moment, or the overall depth of Irish rugby. But I think the model here is sustainable. The game is well financed, well run, and we've been able to keep our best players in Ireland pretty much across the board. We've been able to give our provinces a chance of success. So, like, for us to try and readjust to a salary cap of what, 8 million would basically mean Leinster would have to lose some of those players that they've developed, and I don't think that should happen at all. You know, I mean, Leinster get rewarded for bringing through players because they have so many internationals that the RFU then are willing to fund those internationals who stay in Leinster. Pretty much the most people who leave Leinster, bar Joey, unfortunately, aren't first choice anymore. And even Leinster have done a really good job over the last couple of years of keeping second and third choice players happy. Look at the hooker situation. There's no doubt one of those hookers was targeted by another province, but they decided to stay and fight it out. So, and that's across the board. So no, I don't think a salary cap. I think the English, it's up to the English and the Welsh and Scots. The Scots, in fairness, are spending good money on Glasgow and Edinburgh. They're spending around 8 million each on those in terms of player spend. And they've upped that over the last 2 or 3 years to try and create success. And now they only have to fund 2. The Welsh are obviously going the other direction. They're going down to 4.5 million per squad with a view to going up, when things stabilize. So no, I don't think a salary cap in the URC will come across. And I think a salary cap across the Champions Cup would be nigh on impossible to police as well. You've got so many different tax regimes, you've got so many different entities, and it's only now really the Premiership have really got their claws in. Post Saracens obviously cheating, they've really got their claws into the English clubs' accounts. But to try and go cross border on that would be, I think, impossible. So no, I think the competition itself, the French clubs are close enough in spending to Leinster that it's going to be competitive. Leinster still haven't won it, but and they've been in a very good position this time for the last 3 or 4 years, and obviously have found a team better than them on the day. But at the moment, they just look so convincing. The fact that Ireland have won a Grand Slam, there's a huge amount of hype. But until Leinster have that trophy, I think we need to hold our horse a little bit.
And just on the central contract system, okay, if we're talking about how it's very difficult to compare the English situation, Eddie, with the Irish situation. If we're just talking about comparing Irish provinces with Irish provinces and the central contract system where James Ryan renewed his yesterday. Josh van der Fleer is on the central contract system now, and looking through the names there's 15 players who are on contracts at the moment. One of those, Jacob Stockdale, is going back to just an Ulster deal at the end of the season. But then you've got Ian Henderson that's up for renewal as well. Conor Murray, Peter Mahoney, Keith Earls, Tyg Byrne, and Bundy Aki. Of that bunch of players, I think they're pretty much all above 30. Some of them are definitely getting towards the tail end of their careers. Maybe someone like Tyg Byrne has a bit more time left in him, and he's only 1 year into his central contract. But it's foreseeable that in 3 or 4 years' time, if there are, we'll say, 15 central contracts up for grabs, 14 or 15 of them could be Leinster players. And that is very, very difficult all of a sudden for any of the other 3 provinces to even attempt to bridge a gap.
Well, it's a carrot and a stick system, which I think is fair. Like we're in a competitive environment sport. So the province that produces the most internationals gets rewarded with the most central contracts, which takes pressure off their salary budget, and that's fair. Like
is it good? Is it good business from the IRFU's point of view to have one team considerably better than all the rest?
Well, you can't not. How do you change that unless you say, well, you wake up on a Monday and you say, geez, Leinster are really the best team by a mile in Ireland. So let's now break up this Leinster team and spread them to the 4 corners of Ireland and even it up for the 4 provinces. Like, that's your option, which is, you think about it, is ludicrous. Like, and already, by the way, Leinster would argue that's happening already to their players.
Yeah.
Their players that don't make the cut in Leinster are shipped off to the provinces. Sometimes because that they know that if they don't do that, there's no pathway from in Ireland. So, like, I think you can't punish a province for being really good at what they do. I know they have advantages in Leinster. Don't get me wrong; everyone knows that. But I think the system, the RFU have to have a system where if they're going to fund a centrally contracted model, they have to give those central contracts to the best players. That's what you do. You reward. So if that happens to Leinster, happen to get more, there would. Let's not. It wasn't 100 years ago that if the centrally contracted players were dominated by Munster. You know, and I think as well you have to be careful. Like there, sometimes when something happens, like at the moment, Leinster are the talk of the town, and rightly so. That you say, oh, we've got to do something about this, so we make a strategic decision to fix something that's. Like it's Munster's job to get back on the horse here. It's Ulster's job to get back on the horse and try and compete with Leinster. And there are pathways for them. But I think the notion that you would break Leinster up is what one way of doing it, which sounds ludicrous. Or the other way is that you centrally contract players who aren't the best 15 players in the country just to spread the financial load. I don't see a solution here that's equitable or workable on that basis. It's just that's the way it is at the moment. But it's up to the other provinces, to produce the players to take those central contracts. And we've seen that happening. And I would say one thing as well, because we do tend to pat ourselves in the back here about what a brilliant system we have in Ireland. I'm always saying we have a brilliant system, and I don't step back from that. But let's not forget that 4 of the backline that beat England in the Grand Slam were not Irish products. Mm-hmm. Basically the 2 wingers, Bundy Aki and Gibson Park, did not come through the Irish system. So despite all that, we still need in Ireland other resources from other countries to be brought in and to be taken on board as Irish players or project players so that we can compete at international level. So it's a fairly complex environment. And just remember, like any ecosystem, and rugby is an ecosystem, if you change a regulation or you bring in a new way of doing something, there's always unintended consequences. And sometimes you don't know if you do it. So you have to be very careful if you tinker with stuff. But I don't have a problem with the RFU rewarding central contracts to the best players. And if most of those players come out of one province, that's fair. And the other provinces have to pony up if they want to catch up. And I remind you that it wasn't a million years ago that Munster would have dominated that conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think Eddie's spot on there. And even though we have a great system, we have been reliant on those project players, and obviously McAnson is Irish, but he came through the Australian development system, or his Irish passport came through the Australian development system. But I think realistically, to change the dial for the other provinces, as Eddie said, they're going to have to find players who are good enough to be internationals for Ireland. So, and I think if you look at Connacht just as the bottom province at the moment in terms of the URC, potentially will pass out Munster. They do seem to have some good kids coming through. Matty Devine, Harry West. Eddie's working with some in Buccaneers. We're seeing Carl Ford have a big impact. The 2 Murrays, but realistically, probably they need three of them to become first choice for Ireland, for Connacht really to get the benefit of that, and then to be able to keep them. Likewise in Munster, Munster obviously have changed their setup with Ian Costello leaving the academy to become an operations role. They're filling that academy spot. So they're trying to work out how they can maximize the real gems that are in their pathway. And unfortunately for them, from an outsider looking in, you're saying they have some real talent there, but a lot of them are back rows, right? So there's going to be, they need a bit of a mix. They need some, back 3 players who are going to become the next Keith Earls. But if they can get them, and that takes a while, if we can get them, then, and Leinster, some of the Johnny Sexton retires, the Ty Furlong retires, etc. And maybe the next man up isn't of the same quality. So like Leinster obviously moved Andrew Porter across the Loosehead, but Leinster are going to lose Cian Healy, this year. And in time, Ty Furlong will retire. If they don't have a like-for-like replacement, well, then Leinster get weaker, and it's not as easy. There's no guarantee that another Ty Furlong is going to come through the Leinster system in the next 10 years. It's just they're generational type players. Like, it's a freak that Gary Ringrose has come through in the same era that Brian O'Driscoll retired. Those players don't tend to come through year on year, no matter how good a system is. So things can change, but at the moment, it looks like Leinster should be top team for the next 3 or 4 years, I would say.
Right. We'll move it on to the actual rugby on the pitch now, because I don't think we'll solve anything just today. This is all long-term stuff. But someone you mentioned there, Birch, to be honest, Gary Ringrose. So it's not long ago where we were talking about how when Johnny Sexton doesn't play for Leinster, they just look like a different team And and obviously when he does play, they look like a different team, obviously. Is Gary Ringrose getting to that level of importance now for Leinster and with Ireland? Because we could see it against Ulster. Naturally, like the weather conditions were brutal, obviously, that day. But they looked like a different team for a large part of that game on Friday night with Ringrose in midfield on both sides of the ball. I mean, he scores 2 tries in the opening half. He sets up the third one. So basically he had a hand in all 3 of the tries when the game was actually in the balance. He came up with an absolutely enormous tackle on Mike Brown in the first couple of minutes of the game as well. And also when they're down to 14 players early in the second half and the game is probably still in the balance as well, he's coming up with a massive jackal penalty in midfield that puts them down towards the 22, and a few minutes later they eventually end up scoring from that territory. Is he getting to that stage now where he is just absolutely vital to Leinster's chances?
Yeah, I think he is. I think he's absolutely outstanding, and particularly with Sexton being out, obviously James Ryan has taken on captaincy and that leadership role, and his play is outstanding. But I think Ryan in the forwards and Ringrose in the backs are probably the two. Look, they've got so many, Hugh Keenan's is class as well, but Ringrose at the moment is just giving Leinster everything. He's giving them the flair, but he's giving them that physical edge. Defensively, he's the defensive leader. He's peerless, and for me, if there's a Lions test this summer, he's starting 13, and obviously he didn't go on the last Lions tour, which in hindsight looks a big error, but he has taken his game to another level, and I think if he was out for the final or semi-final, it does make Leinster, more vulnerable.
Eddie, looking ahead to Toulouse, just very kind of early thoughts on that game. The Toulouse and Sharks match was an absolute cracker for most of it. I know Toulouse ran away with it in the end, but it was harem scarum stuff for a lot of it, and Toulouse were kind of just trading blow for blow.
Well, it was a great game until probably the last 15 minutes when the wheels came off. But I have to say the thing that struck me about Toulouse is that there's a few things. In fact, they've really quality players. Where do you start with them, But I just thought their capacity to create scores from unstructured rugby was frightening. That to me was that they looked like when they were in the zone in the last 20 minutes, they just felt they could score from anywhere. And some of the scores they conjured up, like from turnovers and loose kicks. So, like I was saying, maybe Leinster slept well on Friday night after the Leicester game, but they wouldn't have slept as soundly on Saturday night after the Toulouse game. I just think that Toulouse look like a team that can beat Leinster. I know it's in Dublin, but I would be saying that Leinster need to really put in a big shift. Because if Toulouse come loaded and they play well, it's going to be a very tight game. And they just have that capacity. They have the confidence and the kind of it's that French arrogance when they get on the front foot, and it's not a bad arrogance. It's just that they believe they can open you up from anywhere. But the thing that struck me most about Toulouse in that game was their capacity of unstructured rugby to just cut you to pieces, which is very hard to defend. Like most defense systems are set up around structured rugby, giving teams the ball in certain areas of the field, off whether it's a set piece or a rock or a maul, and then defending from that, where all your chess pieces are in place. The trouble is when you kick the ball away or you turn it over, particularly turnovers, like your structure is completely all over the place. And sometimes even with a good kick chase structure, you can get caught in mismatches. I just thought Toulouse were outstanding on that, and they just have so many guys that can make stuff happen out of nothing. And that's probably the biggest threat to Leinster. I'm sure you'll be talking about it before the game, close to it, but Leinster have to really control that game, because if they lose control of the game, like they did a bit in the first half against Leicester, you could pay a very big price against a team like Toulouse.
I think we've lost Barnard temporarily there. We'll keep going without him. But in terms of this weekend, just the last point on Leinster before we move on. They have a 30-man squad going down to Johannesburg that arrived today. Only 14 of the 30 players are, in the senior squad. You've 13 academy players and 3 players who aren't even in the academy at sub-academy. Like that that's the way Leinster have set themselves up this season with the way they've performed, that they can allow themselves the opportunity to bring a squad like that down to South Africa for risk-free rugby, where they're just going to learn so much about themselves.
Well, it's really really smart strategic planning from Leinster. Like they would have seen the fixture list at the start of the season, and they would have seen back end of the year we've got 2 games in South Africa. So like, let's put the URC to bed before we get there. And then it's all about managing ourselves through the 2 competitions and making sure we win the URC and get a shot at winning Europe. So they've played their cards really smartly, so that they knew they got to the point they wanted to be before the last 2 games of the season, that they were unassailable. They were guaranteed a home playoff in the URC, so they could roll the dice. So if they lose 2 games in South Africa, nothing changes for them. They can stay focused in Dublin on Europe. Plus the fact, the upside of that as well, the value these young players get of being out of country, on tour, playing in the URC. So they'll make mistakes. Maybe they'll win, maybe they won't. There's nothing but upside here. But to be fair to Leinster, they had to work hard to put themselves into this position. But you could imagine them, this was planned back in August. I'm going, look at the fixture list here. Let's make sure we're home and dry before we get to those last 2 regular season games. And then we can just sit back and make sure we're focused on what we need to focus on.
First, while you dropped out there, and welcome back, we were just talking about, you know, the luxury that Leinster have given themselves, where they're able to bring 16 of their 30-man squad to South Africa are either academy or sub-academy. And just to move it on, like to look at Munster, it's as strong a squad that they're bringing down as they can play with. I know there are a few injuries, obviously, but it just obviously shows the way those 2 seasons have gone, where Munster now are heading down there for first of all the Stormers this weekend in Cape Town, and then back to the Sharks next week. And at the very least, you think they need 1 win out of those 2 games, and they've found themselves in a tricky spot. Well, more than a tricky spot, I would say.
Yeah, I think Munster are in a real tricky spot. But obviously, it's because of the start they had to the season, where they're really slow to kind of find a bit of form, and that transition, you know, from how they played under Johan to how they're playing under Graham Rowntree. This is massive for them. I think Rowntree would have been disappointed with the Sharks game in Europe, coming off the back of that really poor performance against Glasgow. You know, he said, "Oh, there's going to be a reaction. I can promise you that." I remember the post-match press conference in Thomond Park. There was a bit of reaction, but not the old Munster reactions where someone really pays for a poor performance the week before. So they've had a little bit more time to, I suppose, get themselves organised. They're bringing down a strong squad, but the challenge is massive. Obviously, you know, the Stormers and the Sharks are 2 good sides, and they have points to play for themselves. So I think it's going to be really difficult for them if they can salvage something and salvage that European spot. I think they'll go into pre-season, obviously, in a good place. I think, you know, Challenge Cup rugby next year for Munster would leave an awful hangover. You know, I think they have been a huge part of what made Champions Cup, Heineken Cup special. And for them, obviously, to not be in that next year from a player point of view, in terms of excitement, and also from a financial point of view, I think it'd be a big blow. So, yeah, fingers crossed they can do enough to get in.
And Eddie, in terms of the Stormers this weekend, like, they're not exactly going to take on a side that have nothing really left to play for. I mean, the Stormers have Ulster breathing down their neck to get into the top 2 and have a home path all the way through to a semi-final. So their motivations are going to be as high as ever to stop Munster. And then also as well, even if you're looking at the conditions on Saturday night, like, the weather Munster really struggled in that sun and that heat in the second half in Durban a couple of weeks ago. And I know it's going to be a bit later in Cape Town. It's going to be an evening game, but looking at the forecast, you're probably still talking warm, dry weather up in the high teens, and that's the ideal sort of conditions for the Stormers to play the brand of rugby that they like to throw the ball around in.
Yeah, I think the really bad news for Munster was that the Stormers and the Sharks got beaten last weekend. So suddenly they're out of Europe. So their only focal point now is the URC. They've nothing else to play for. Yeah, it's just probably the wrong fixture list for Munster at the moment, away from home. Confidence wise, they're struggling. Like, again, we've talked a lot this season about the Munster attack, and it has been really transformative. And they're playing some really good rugby. They're accessing the kill zone from 40, 50 meters away, as I think from last year. It's all kick to the corner and wall it in, and they can do that as well. But you can't ignore the fact that the Munster defence has gone off a cliff. They've shipped 80 points in the last 2 URC matches, and another 50, against the Sharks and that. So, I mean, I just think that they need to tidy up their defence, and it seems to me that they've a defence that worked most of the season for them. Like, they were second in the URC in terms of their defensive performances. They weren't just behind Leinster, but the last while, and it's like this nervousness that's coming to the team when they don't have the ball, and they go off script and they do silly stuff. And it's not a good place to be coming into the end of the season where your defence is wobbling and you feel like that you could be vulnerable to giving up 3 or 4 tries a game. So I think that what Munster needed is a big performance and a good result this weekend. If they could beat the Stormers, it could steady the whole season from. They need a settler at the moment. They need a game that settles them around what they're at. But I don't know if the Stormers is going to be the one. They may end up going into the last game of the URC having to get a result, and it's probably going to be a slightly better or easier result to get for them against the Sharks. But I really worry about the Stormers game again. As you say, the conditions are going to be perfect for the Stormers to play, but we'll see. But it's in Munster's hands. They just need to start defending, because they are scoring tries. There's no doubt about that. They're scoring. Their attack is still functioning. It's the defense has malfunctioned badly, and somehow they need to get the confidence back in that. And if they don't, I was worried about their last game as well. I worried that they would get caught, and they were caught again defensively. So they need to. That's the one part of the game they need to fix. Very fixable, but there's at the moment it's the part of the game that's running away from.
Yeah, so that is 5:15 p.m. on Saturday evening. Stormers against Munster. Lions and Leinster is up at 3 o'clock. And Connacht and Cardiff is Saturday 7:35 p.m. All of those games on RT2 and RT Player. But on Connacht, Eddie, as well, we spoke last time you were on a couple of weeks ago about the Andy Friend's legacy of, whether or not they actually get into Champions Cup rugby at the end of the season. He's leaving behind a quality legacy, but more than likely, barring some freak set of results, this is going to be his last home game as Connacht head or Connacht director of rugby this weekend. And just to look back further at the job he's done, it's been great, and they still have so much to play for this season, and particularly with Cardiff coming to town, a big boost for them as well. The fact that they've got Jack Carty, Finlay Bealham, Dennis Buckley, all back in full training, back from injury and available for selection for 2 crucial games.
Yeah, well, look, to be fair, I said this about Andy Friend the last time we spoke, is that he's brought huge stability to the province, and as a professional coach, stability around your team is actually, in the long run, you need to create stability. And been stability in terms of the performances. Like, they're now sitting 6th in the URC. They had a very tough start to the season because their fixture list was ridiculous. And that was, again, nobody's fault, only the fact that they couldn't get into the sports ground with the new surface there. So they had this crazy start to the season. They were behind the 8 ball and they fought their way out of it. They've won their last 5 URC matches. They'll be disappointed of the result in Benetton, because they went to Benetton and they could win there. But Benetton are a tricky side now to beat when they're at home in particular. But anyway, in terms of the URC, they're up to 6th in the URC. They have a great chance of qualifying for Europe next year. But Andy Friend has brought that stability around the team. Again, he's brought through a lot of young talent from the province, and he's built a kind of a brand where Connacht are really, really good side to watch. They're very entertaining to watch. And like the sports ground is a great place to go now. It's got a great buzz and the locals have bought into it. So he has like, it's the old story, when you leave a coaching job, are you leaving the place in a better shape than when you got it? And you could, without a shadow of a doubt, 100%, Andy Friend has done that. Because you look at the team, you look at how they're playing, you look at the stability around it. He's done a phenomenal job. So yeah, Connacht are in a great place. Now, that said, this game this weekend is really important for them. If they win this weekend, there's lots of possibilities, because the problem for them is their last game of the season is away in Glasgow. And let's be honest about it and let's be realistic. The odds of them going to Glasgow and winning are they're not in their favour. Let's put it that way. They need a huge performance in Glasgow, because Glasgow are right up there as well. They're in great form at the moment. So this is why this game is so important. If they win against Cardiff on the weekend, they're in a great place. And then the Glasgow game will be important, but it's a game that they can probably throw the kitchen sink at and see what happens. So I think this one on the weekend is going to be right where they want to be. And I said they'll see this one as the one that can really, put them in a fantastic shape for the last weekend.
Yeah, and Birch on Ulster, they're Friday night at home against the Dragons. They're in a kind of a tricky kind of a holding pattern really for the next few weeks, Ulster, where they've got 2 home games, Dragons and Edinburgh, that they would be expected to win and probably expected to win comfortably, particularly with how Edinburgh's season is falling off a cliff. But they're pretty much locked into the playoffs. Chances are they'll have a home quarter final. Pretty much all they can do now over the next couple of weeks is win those 2 games as best they can, and just hope in the back of their minds that the Stormers slip up and one and they can nip into that top 2 spot. But pretty much from here on in, it's about getting your mindset and getting momentum rolled for the playoffs.
Yeah, I think they need to find enough in those games to give them that confidence or self-belief that they can actually go and do something in the playoffs. I mean, they've worked hard all year. They've had a decent year overall. Obviously, that bad period after Christmas. Actually, since that Leinster game, when they were in control, and Leinster had a red card, and they allowed Leinster back into it. They had a bit of a blip after that, shipped a lot of points away to Sale, etc. But have recovered to a certain extent. I think the last 16 game against Leinster in the Champions Cup, I think that could have been a blow to their confidence. They never really fired a shot. So they need to get something out of these 2 games where they're improving an element of their game that they believe will help them get across the line at the end of the season, or else it's going to be difficult to see them do anything in the playoffs. And obviously the weather conditions in the Viva probably hamper their attacking game, but they need to probably be able to play no matter what type of weather they get, or find a way of getting their strength into the game, which is probably based around their line-out maul at the moment. But we saw Leinster just starve them of opportunities to use that. So I think there's be a lot of work done on the mental side of it, rebuilding that confidence, freshening players up, maybe adapting 1 or 2 things tactically so they can go into that playoff series with, I suppose, a little bit more belief. Because based on what we've seen so far, they are going to struggle to beat the stronger teams, I think.
Mm-hmm. Eddie, how do you see Ulster confidence-wise, momentum-wise going in over the next few weeks?
It's always been their bugbear over the last few seasons. Ulster have been on fire at times during the season. I'm going back last 3 or 4 seasons even. Since Dan McFarland arrived, they've had those patches where they're like almost untouchable, and then they hit a slump and they limp, for a period, and then they come back a bit. And I think they feel themselves that with the talent they have, they should probably be in the hunt for silverware more. Like, they have kind of fallen short based on even their own expectations. So Bernard's right. This URC is very important from, they're out of Europe, and okay, they didn't really fire a shot, but they were beaten on a very wet day or very wet evening against a team that are, have talked about as potentially winning the European Cup. So it's no shame to lose in Dublin to Leinster on a wet night, when I think they do have a strong maul, but I think they have a great backline as well, Ulster, and there was no way to get into play. But going back to the URC now, I swear it all, focuses for them. They do need 2 big performances here, just as Bernard said, to give them that shot of confidence. Because when they get into that zone and they're confident, they're a very, very good team. But if they were to limp into the playoffs now, with a couple of bad performances, it wouldn't do their confidence any good going into the playoffs. And I think that's why they need 2 big performances, just to get them back on the horse, because they've had moments again this year where they have had those ups and downs, which has really kind of put the heebie-jeebies on them at times. And they need to put that to bed going into the playoffs, because once you're in the playoffs, if a bad day out, the season's over. So I think that in the back of their mind, that's why the next 2 games are really important in terms of, Bernard said, getting their mojo back,
Yeah, and that's Friday night, 7:35, Ulster at home against the Dragons. We'll finish up, guys, talking about the Women's Six Nations. Obviously, Bernard and Fiona Coughlin went into a bit more detail on it last week, recapping the France match and looking ahead to Italy. But Eddie, you mentioned confidence and Ulster there in the last answer, and that is precisely what the Ireland women's team needs right now with 3 games to go in this championship. There's two matches that they will be targeting for a win. And if they get one this weekend in Parma against Italy, it'll start to feel like a much different competition all of a sudden.
Yeah, it's kind of a must-win game for them, really. Let's be honest. You know that no one's expecting to beat England. The 2 games they must win are obviously Scotland and Italy, and the rubber hits the road this weekend in Italy. I think overall a couple of things for the women that's probably been sorry guys. A couple of things that's been a problem for the women is I think they were probably a bit over ambitious in their expectations when the season started. You know, playing Wales, they felt that they were really in a good place to win that game. Unfortunately, that game didn't work out well, and it knocked their confidence. And then they played France, and I think that performance was quite poor as well. I know they were sifting through the wreckage looking for positives, but I think that one of the things they have to fix is their defence. I mean, there's a lot of talk about their attack and how their attack is getting better and that, but the truth of the matter is that against France, the harsh statistics are they missed over 40 tackles. If you're going to miss that many tackles in a game, you're going to lose the game. So, like, if they go to Italy this weekend and they defend badly, they could lose the game. I think they have the attacking game to beat Italy, but have they the defensive game? I don't know. And that's what they need to focus on. If they defend well, they'll win. And then, you know, England is a game where they just don't have to get through it any way they can. It's going to be ugly. But if they can win in Italy, then they can really have a shot at winning the second game of the championship, which for me would be a good championship, you know. But I think they probably were a bit over ambitious on when they were going into the championship. And you have to be somewhat ambitious, but I think they got caught cold against Wales, and that kind of knocked the wind out of their sails a bit. So this is why this weekend is so important for them to get back on the horse. And I think if they to start anywhere, defend a lot better. And I think if they defend well, they'll win. But if they don't defend well, they could easily lose in Italy. And that would, you know, make the crisis even more existential in terms of the championship.
Yeah. And Birch, the other little side plot of this week is this team going back to Parma, the scene of probably the lowest point in Irish women's rugby in modern times. And, you know, it's the word Parma now in women's rugby in Ireland, it's up there with Lawns for the Irish men's team of a certain generation, or, you know, Macedonia for Irish soccer fans or something like that. It's just the name of the place probably brings back a lot of bad memories. And we were out there yesterday. We asked a couple of players about, you know, going back there. Is there a certain significance to it where you want to right a few wrongs? And, you know, they obviously tried to bat that away as straight as they could, but it must be a factor for some of those players going back to that stadium in Parma and just trying to right a few wrongs of 18 months ago.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, to be fair, there's a lot of youngsters in this current squad who maybe weren't involved, and that's probably what Greg McWilliams has tried to do. He's tried to build a group that will be there for a long time. But there is obviously, you know, some key players who are part of that. I think there's been a lot of change. I think, you know, change of coach, you know, contracting, you know, access to the high performance center in Abbottstown to train. I think there's been a decent amount of investment in them, and we just got to basically wait now and let it develop. And it'd be brilliant if we could get a win this weekend. You know, that would give them a great chance of beating Scotland, and then effectively, you know that you're chasing the rest of the pack. But if we were to lose this weekend, it puts massive pressure on what is a young team to try and get a result and avoid the wooden spoon against Scotland. So on form, it's going to be very tight. On form, you would nearly fancy Italy, to be honest, based on their results. But hopefully the rest week, the experience we've gained, I agree with Eddie. I think we were caught cold against Wales. That this week we'll see, you know, a much better performance, and if they get a win, it'll be super.
Yeah, that's 4:45 p.m. kickoff on Saturday, Italy against Ireland in Parma. Live commentary on RTÉ Radio 1. And as we said as well, there's a triple header of URC action on RT2 and RT Player on Saturday as well. Lions against Leinster, Stormers Munster, and Connacht against Cardiff. So heaps of rugby going on. Not to mention final round of the AIL regular season this week. And Eddie, best of luck again in that.
Thanks.
Hope you get the results you're looking for and get through to the playoffs. But lads, thanks a million for joining us. Birch, as always, thanks a million for coming on. And Eddie, all the best. We'll speak to you again soon.